Some photos seem completely innocent until it's revealed that they're connected to inexplicable mysteries that have never been solved. In some cases, they show missing people before they vanished, and in others, they contain the last known image of a victim who lost their life to foul play. And they serve as a reminder that anyone's life can change in the blink of an eye. Number 10. In May of 2008, 60-year-old ex-model Ava Wol was married to Hal Wol, her fourth husband, who worked as a real estate developer. They met in Reno, Nevada, and as soon as the two saw each other, they felt a connection, and it wasn't long before they fell in love. They lived together in Lawrenceville, Georgia, where they lived a life of luxury, as Hal was very successful in his role, and he was known to be a millionaire. Ava is described by her family as a vivacious woman who was liked by everyone she met, which makes her case all the more heartbreaking. But on the 1st of May, 2008, everything would change for Ava's loved ones. Rather than going to work, finding tenants for stores in Hal's shopping center, she had stayed home after complaining that she was feeling ill. Later that day, she was found deceased by Hal in the couple's kitchen, and the police were called. They determined that she'd been punched in the face, after which her assailant chased her through the kitchen as she tried to make her way out of the house and away from danger. Unfortunately, she was unable to escape, and her life was ended with a sharpened blade. The weapon used was sharp enough that investigators suggested that it was a scalpel. The house was thoroughly searched, but Ava's attacker left very little evidence behind, as no footprints, fingerprints, or DNA were ever found. Despite the best efforts of everyone involved, it started to seem as though the case would go cold. But a few months later, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Norcross office received a note that had been created using letters cut from several magazines. In it, Ava's attacker stated that he loved her and claimed that she said they could be together. It also claimed that Ava hated living in the house with Hal. The culprit believed she was lying, and according to the letter, he had warned her that he would end her life if she didn't hold true to her promise to him. It goes on to state that Ava loved Hal's money more than the attacker, and it ends with the line, "We could have been so happy together." In an effort to gather more information, Hal offered a $250,000 reward, but no one came forward, and he would eventually pass away without finding any answers. Several people came forward to report that they'd seen a suspicious man walking around the neighborhood on the day that the attack took place, and he was seen again after it was committed. A composite sketch was created and circulated, but no one recognized him, and he's not been identified. Since there were no signs of forced entry into the home, it's believed that Ava either let her attacker in, or that he knew she was home alone. But no evidence was ever found that she was having an affair, and it was almost certain that a man had committed the crime, thanks to the strength needed to inflict her injuries. But then, the case took another strange turn. After Hal passed away, the family was sorting through his possessions when they discovered some photos that left them puzzled. One of the photos dated back to 1987, and it showed a man who looked strikingly similar to the unidentified man in the sketch. It's believed that both Ava and Hal knew the mystery man, but the rest of his family had never seen him before, and they believe the case will be solved if he's ever identified. If you recognize the man in the photo, you're urged to contact the Gwinnett County Police tip line at 770-513-5480. Number 9. 55-year-old Albert Kite, who hailed from Denver, Colorado, is the subject of a mystery that started in May of 2004, and his case remains unsolved. At the time, Albert, known as Al, was working for an engineering consulting firm called Carter Douglas, and on the morning of the 24th of May, he failed to show up for work. This struck his employer as strange, as he was known as a model employee who always showed up on time and who took his role with the company very seriously. When he was running a few minutes late, he would always call ahead, and since there was no word from him, his manager tried to contact him on his cell phone and home line, but he got no answer, and he then decided to contact Al's emergency contact, which was his sister, Barbara, as was listed on his contact information. Barbara lived in Virginia and hadn't seen her brother for some time, nor had she spoken to him that morning. She also tried in vain to contact Al, and it was then decided that the police needed to become involved. They requested a welfare check at his house, and this was done later that afternoon. When Al failed to answer the door, they decided to force it open as they were concerned for his safety. At first, they believed Al wasn't there since the house was neat and in order, but when they checked the basement, they found that something horrible had transpired. He was found lying on the floor deceased, and the room contained a lot of biological material. One investigator described it as the worst crime scene he'd ever encountered in his career. It was determined that Al had been struck in the back of the head with a heavy object while he was walking down the stairs to the basement, after which his hands and feet were bound. He was then attacked with a blade and his life was ended. A coroner would state that he likely passed away 2 days earlier, and it seemed as though the attacker was let into the house since there was no sign of forced entry. It would later come to light that Al had rented the basement out to a new tenant, and that he had mentioned that he wanted to move a recliner from the living room to the basement. It's believed that he and the tenant were busy moving it downstairs when the man decided to attack him. Following this, he went into the kitchen and helped himself to some of Al's food. He then slept in his bed, took a shower, and stole some of his clothes before finally fleeing. A neighbor would report seeing the man leave the day after the attack took place. When the house was processed by crime scene investigators, it was discovered that the culprit had cleaned the house and the weapons used in the attack with bleach to avoid being identified. They also found a rental application containing the name Robert Cooper, but it was discovered that this was a pseudonym. The other details that were filled in were also fake and led nowhere. After the culprit had committed the crime, he used Al's debit and credit cards to make some purchases, and the receipts for these transactions were later found in Al's truck, which had been abandoned about a block and a half from his house. The ATM that was used by the attacker provided the only solid lead in this case, as he was captured by its camera, but his face was partially obscured with a ski mask, and he's never been identified. No further leads have ever been found, and the motive for the attack remains unknown. Number 8. The case involving Lonnie Franklin Jr., who's been identified as the Grim Sleeper serial killer, has been solved, but many questions remain unanswered, and the police have released a series of photos in case a member of the public recognizes more of his possible victims. Franklin spent his childhood growing up in Los Angeles. He served in the military for a while, but was dishonorably discharged after he was found guilty of attacking someone in July of 1974, which would serve as a precursor to his later crimes. On that occasion, he served more than 3 years in prison, and it would come to light that he and his fellow attackers had taken photos of the attack while it was happening. But he would go on to commit many more heinous crimes, and in the mid-1980s, the authorities started to fear that a serial killer was at work in Los Angeles. The culprit always attacked vulnerable African American women, many of whom were street workers. Most of the victims were habitual users of illegal substances, and between 1983 and 1985, he ended the lives of at least 13 people. A year later, it was determined that he'd attacked at least 2 more women, and a team called the Southside Slayer Task Force was assembled. A reward of up to $250,000 was offered for information, but no one came forward. As the victim count continued to rise, it was suspected that several men were responsible for the attacks, but this could not be confirmed due to a lack of evidence, since Franklin was very good at covering his tracks. 2 of these cases were eventually attributed to someone else, but in 2007, after Janisha Peters' life was ended, DNA was found at the crime scene, and it was linked to 11 other victims. The reward was increased to $500,000, and the attacker was given the moniker the Grim Sleeper, due to the fact that he took a break of several years before resuming his nefarious activities. A witness came forward to report that he'd seen a man getting rid of a body, and he was able to provide a 911 operator with the attacker's description and license plate number, which was traced to the Cosmopolitan Church. A victim who managed to escape described Franklin to investigators, but still they were unable to identify him. The next step was to focus on the DNA that was collected from the crime scenes, and when no exact match was found, investigators started looking for familial matches. Franklin's son, Christopher, came back as a partial match, and they started keeping an eye on Franklin. An undercover officer posed as a pizza restaurant employee, and after Franklin had a meal there, his DNA was collected from the cutlery he had used, pizza crusts, and his plate. The samples came back as an exact match, and he was arrested. He was charged with 10 counts of murder, and he was sentenced to be executed, but he passed away while incarcerated in 2020, and the cause of his passing has not been made public. Number 7. It must be a harrowing experience when a family member goes missing, but it must be made all the more worse when they vanish in a foreign country, never to be seen again, which is what happened in the case involving 27-year-old Kelli Cribbs. Kelli originally hails from Brooklet, Georgia, and she spent her childhood growing up on a farm, where she learned to love the outdoors and activities such as fishing. She and her half-sister, Jennifer, had a very close bond and would speak on the phone often. Her family describes her as a very happy person who could usually be seen smiling, even when she was going through a tough time in her life. She loved working with children and elderly people and was known to excel at her role as a nursing assistant. In 2006, she got married to Vince Bad, who was a member of the U.S. Air Force. And as is typically the case when someone marries a serviceman, they moved around the country quite often, as Vince was sent to different Air Force bases during his military career. They eventually had 2 children, and the family relocated to Okinawa in Japan in 2008, after Vince was transferred to Kadena Air Force Base. She managed to keep in touch with her family via video calls, and she revealed that they would be moving once more, either to Alaska or Germany. She added that she was excited for the move, but then something unexpected happened. On the 26th of October, 2011, Kelli and the couple's children attended a 7 p.m. off-base church service, and Vince joined them at the church a little later. It's known that she arrived home at around 8:45, but Vince only arrived home at about 10 p.m., since he remained at the church to speak to their pastor. To his surprise, when he entered the house, there was no sign of Kelli, and her car was no longer parked in its usual spot. He contacted her family and informed them that he was unable to find her, and it was immediately suspected something was wrong since the children were left at the house alone, which Kelli would never have done willingly. A missing person report was filed with the police and at the Kadena Air Force Base that same night, and a witness would later state that he saw her entering the base at around 8:35 as she was heading home. Her car was then seen driven out of the base at 9:11, and all efforts to contact her failed since her phone had been turned off. 3 days later, on the 29th of October, the car was located near a set of cliffs in Cape Zanpa, and inside investigators found her keys, ID, wedding ring, and a note in which it was made to look as though Kelli was bidding her family farewell. But it's believed that this note was either written by someone else or that Kelli was forced to write it, and her mother Janice traveled to Japan where she started putting up flyers to bring attention to her daughter's case. She believed that Kelli was abducted from the family's home and that her attacker ended her life, though she's never been found. Anyone who has any information that could lead to Kelli's case being solved should contact the Air Force Office of Special Investigations by texting the word AFOSI and relevant information to the number 274-637. Number 6. The disappearance of Terry Pettit and Ron Yakimchuk, which occurred in 1973, is a case that continues to baffle investigators, and they've asked for the public's help in solving it many decades later. Their case started on the 12th of June that year, when they packed their belongings into their Volkswagen Beetle and headed to Montreal, where they were planning on attending the wedding of a friend, Brian Campbell. But the wedding was just one stop on their way to their actual destination, which was the Maritimes, where the couple hoped they could start a new life, having lived in Edmonton for several years. They'd been warned about driving that distance in their Beetle since it had seen better days, but they would not be dissuaded. Before they left, several of their friends bid them farewell, one of whom took the last photo of the couple, showing them in the vehicle with the mattress strapped to the roof. They dropped the mattress off at a friend's house soon after leaving, and then traveled to another friend's house to pick up a kayak, which then took the place of the mattress. But when the day of the wedding arrived, it was noted that Terry and Ron were not in attendance. Brian was left disappointed by the fact that they didn't show up, but it turned to worry when it was reported that the couple had not been seen or made contact with their loved ones after they left. As time passed by without any word from them, their friends started to grow ever more concerned. One of their friends decided to check the Unemployment Insurance Commission's records to check whether they were paying UIC, and he became even more alarmed when he learned that they hadn't, and that their joint bank account had seen no activity since they were last seen. They were eventually reported as missing, but the police weren't too interested in the case, as they believed Terry and Ron had simply started a new life and failed to keep in touch with their friends and family. Eventually, 2 years had passed with no progress being made, and their friends started to speculate as to what happened to them. Some felt that they may have accidentally driven off the road and ended up in Lake Superior, and the road east of Dryden was searched for clues, such as skid marks, several times, but with no result. At one point, it was believed that some answers would be found when a beetle, similar to theirs, was found abandoned east of Dryden, but records showed that it was someone else's property. The couple's families have never received any answers in this case, and it isn't known whether the police ever did anything to track them down. Number 5. In 1981, the body of a 20-year-old woman named Selena Keogh was discovered under a set of bushes close to an apartment complex in Montclair, San Bernardino County. Her life was ended via strangulation after she was badly assaulted, and no one saw anything useful, and the attacker remained unidentified for years. In 1986, the mystery only deepened when another woman, 22-year-old Mary Duggan, was also found deceased. She'd been left in the trunk of her own car in Burbank, Los Angeles, but at that point investigators had no way of knowing that the two cases were related, despite both women losing their lives in an identical fashion. But as the years passed by, investigative techniques and technology allowed investigators to make some progress using DNA that had been collected from each crime scene, and it became clear that the same man was responsible for these two attacks. They then used investigative genetic genealogy to identify relatives of the attacker, who'd either willingly entered their DNA into the national database, or who had their DNA collected after being sent to prison. It was then that a suspect was finally identified, and in 2019, Horace Van Vaultz was taken into custody. He was branded a serial killer, but his defense attorney argued that while Van Vaultz had indeed contacted the two victims, he was not the one responsible for ending their lives. Van Vaultz added that he met and spent a lot of time with many different women at the time, and that he had no recollection of meeting the two victims, though he didn't dispute spending time with them since his DNA was present at each of the crime scenes. Years later, it would come to light that he was suspected of ending the life of a third victim, 25-year-old Jana Rowe, who was found deceased on a trash pile. Unfortunately, he never faced the consequences for attacking her, since he was acquitted for that crime before DNA evidence was permissible at any trial, and a retrial cannot be held. Van Vaultz maintained his innocence throughout the trial, reiterating that he may have met with the two victims, but that this didn't prove that he was the attacker. But his pleas fell on deaf ears, and he was found guilty. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He was sent to the California State Prison in Corcoran, and has since been denied any appeals to have his sentence overturned. The case of these two victims may have been solved, but the mystery surrounding Van Vaultz remains, as Burbank investigators have asked for the public's help in identifying what may possibly be subsequent victims. When his house was searched, Van Vaultz was found to be in possession of a cache of photos showing women that he may have attacked, though this has not been confirmed since many of the women depicted have never been identified. It's feared that they've either gone missing or their lives were ended, though one woman did come forward in 2020 to report that she was one of the people depicted and that she knew another woman who appeared in the photos. They were both alive and well, and their photos have now been removed from the 24 or so that remain. Number 4. This photo of a hand-dug well may seem like any other, and quite unremarkable, but the truth is that one of these wells in St. Albert, Canada, may hide a sinister secret related to the disappearance of an 83-year-old woman. The family of the missing Ruth Clark has provided investigators with 2 photos of her, and they've been published in hopes that someone will come forward with information on her strange and unsolved disappearance. The mystery began on the 12th of November, 1990, when Ruth's family was unable to make contact with her after not hearing from her for some time. They contacted the police in Edmonton and requested that they conduct a welfare check at her house in West Edmonton, and they were happy to oblige. At the time, Ruth was living with her son, 42-year-old Ronald, who stated that he hadn't seen her either. The rest of her family reported that they last heard from her 12 days earlier on the 1st of November, and that they had no idea where she might have gone. Ruth's disappearance was very out of character, and foul play was immediately suspected. But there was no way of proving that something untoward had taken place, since no such evidence was found at the house. It remains unclear why Ronald neglected to notify the police about her absence, but it should be noted that he's not considered a suspect. It was announced at one point that a suspect had been identified, and that it was believed that Ruth was no longer alive, since she was likely a victim of homicide. But that suspect's name has never been made public, and it remains unknown whether they're still being investigated. Though they've declined to state what led them there, investigators have started searching hand-dug wells in a rural area north of St. Albert, and they believe Ruth's attacker ended her life before hiding her remains in one of the wells. But they have reported that they're looking for 2 specific wells that are located on a farmstead. They added that it's an area where a set of trails leads through thick brush, and that the well is said to be about 160 to 200 feet deep. One of the wells is known to be lined with brick, while the second has a wooden lining. It's likely that these wells will be very hard to find, since they've not been in use for a very long time, and have been covered up by the surrounding brush and other types of debris over the years. Several sites have been searched over the years since Ruth's disappearance, but the 2 wells in question remain elusive. If you know of such a well, you're asked to get in contact with the Edmonton Police Service at 780-423-4567. Number 3. There's always some risk involved when traveling to a foreign country, but most people expect to return home refreshed after a holiday and have no fears of having their lives ended while exploring an area away from home. Unfortunately, this was not the case for 28-year-old Reagan Kelli, whose case is still being investigated in Thailand. Reagan hails from Selsdon in London, England, where he was employed as a building supervisor. He was in Thailand during a month-long holiday when he suddenly disappeared under some very strange circumstances that are yet to be explained. Reagan has traveled abroad on several occasions, and according to his friends and family, he was always able to make friends quickly thanks to his approachable and social nature. But soon after checking into the Mad Monkey Hostel on Phuket Island, he went missing and has not been located to this day. What's causing his family and the authorities a lot of concern is the fact that he was seen running out of a bar on the island on the night of the 3rd of January, and this was confirmed by CCTV footage that was later acquired by the police. Witnesses would come forward to report that they saw Reagan in the company of an unknown man that night. It's believed that the man is also a foreigner who was on holiday on the island, and that they'd never met before. Other people who were staying at the hostel stated that the 2 women were in the hostel that night and that they were seen talking to each other for some time. But the man was not staying over at the hostel, and hence it's assumed that they met elsewhere before going to the bar for a few drinks. They'd been in the bar for a few hours when it's believed that an argument broke out between them. In the CCTV footage, no sound is included, but by their actions they seem to be having a heated discussion about something. Reagan's family has stated that they could see Reagan becoming ever more irate during the discussion, and that the argument seemed to escalate before he suddenly took off running out of the building. He was then seen running towards Patong Beach, with the unknown man following closely behind. CCTV cameras at the beach showed Reagan running past, and about 15 seconds later, the second man could be seen chasing after him for reasons unknown. The next day, his family received the tragic news that Reagan had been found deceased by a swimming instructor, and that he was located in the ocean without any of his clothing. His sister Lori and their father traveled to the island to aid in the investigation, but it's since gone cold, and it remains uncertain what led to Reagan's passing. It's not been determined what he and the unidentified man were arguing about. While some people have speculated that he ended up in the water by accident and was unable to swim back to shore, Reagan's family feels that something about the incident seems strange and that there may be foul play involved. This theory is supported by the fact that the unidentified man has not come forward to clear his name. Furthermore, when he was seen running out of the bar, he was dressed in a Mad Monkey t-shirt, shorts, and a baseball-style hat, and was carrying a crossbody backpack containing his phone, among other things. None of his clothes or possessions have ever been located. The man he was seen with is described as being of a stocky build, and at the time he was wearing shorts with a white t-shirt when he was running after Reagan. Several appeals have been made for the man to come forward, but none have been successful. Number 2. The police in Maryland have released CCTV images of several people who may have witnessed what happened to 62-year-old Charles Joseph Reynolds after he was found deceased in Silver Springs on the 21st of December, 2022. That night, Charles and his family decided to go out for dinner, and upon their arrival at the restaurant, he parked his car in a garage on Wayne Avenue. The dinner went as planned, and they then decided to get some Ben & Jerry's ice cream. But Charles decided to return to the car first to store some of the leftovers from their dinner. In the meantime, the rest of his family walked around the corner to a Ben & Jerry's restaurant, where they waited for Charles to join them. But when he still hadn't arrived several minutes later, they started to worry. When the parking garage was checked, Charles was found deceased on a stairwell, and it was determined that someone had ended his life with a firearm. Strangely, none of his money or jewelry was stolen, and so it's believed that robbery was not the motive, which leaves many questions unanswered. His car was also located in the same spot that it was parked earlier that night, and investigators have no idea why he was attacked or who committed the act. In images that have now been made available to the public, 2 men can be seen in the area. The first is seated in a wheelchair, dressed in jeans, a checkered shirt, a baseball hat, and dark shoes. He also has 2 tote bags around his neck. The second man is seen pushing the first in the wheelchair, and he's dressed in a coat, a white hoodie, dark-colored pants, and what appear to be red and black shoes. It should be noted that neither of these men is suspected of being involved in the incident, but it's believed they may have seen what happened that night. The Montgomery police have asked that anyone with further information contact them at 866-411-8477. Number 1. Usually, when the police release a photo of a suspect, it's in hopes that they'll be identified and tracked down. But this is not the case with Brian Thompson, who's in his 50s and wanted by the authorities. Instead, his photo has been made available to the public as a warning, since it's believed that he may be hitchhiking in New Zealand. The public has been warned that Thompson may be armed and dangerous, and hence they should not pick him up if he's spotted by the side of the road, and instead they should notify the police of his whereabouts so that he can be taken into custody. On the 15th of October, 2025, it was reported by the police that 74-year-old Karen Gilbert Palmer was attacked in her home and her life was ended. Shortly after, it would come to light that her son, Brian Thompson, was on the run, and that he was the one responsible for ending Karen's life. His family would tell investigators that Karen had looked after Palmer his entire life. She'd worked as a nurse in the past, and so looked after her elderly parents before they eventually passed away, giving us insight into her nature. The public has also been asked to remain on the lookout for a red late-model Mitsubishi ASX VRX station wagon with the registration number QGU91, though the authorities have not revealed whether the vehicle belongs to Palmer. It's unlikely that he'll be driving it, since he's believed to be hitchhiking in a bid to escape capture. Karen's niece, Barbara Evans, later told the police that she and Karen often spoke about Palmer and the trouble he was having with his mental health. She told Barbara that he'd shown some worrying behavior in the past few weeks, and that it only got worse as time went by, but she didn't seem concerned for her safety. According to a few text messages shared between the two, Palmer was a recovering addict, and she felt that his behavioral problems started when he finally quit ingesting illegal substances. He'd started growing progressively more aggressive in the days leading up to the attack. She also told Barbara that he was planning on traveling out of town by bus on the 15th of October, since he needed a break from the people around him. She was excited for Palmer to leave, so that she could have a break too, but he ended her life before fleeing. It's not known what caused the attack, but it's assumed that Karen and Palmer got into an argument over something, and that he lost his temper before ending her life. His family has appealed to him to hand himself over to the authorities so that he can get help for his mental health issues, and so that they can receive some closure. If you've seen Palmer, you're asked to contact the police by dialing the emergency number 111. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.